podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
What is up, friends? My name is Ralph Amsden, and you are listening to the Fortcast, part of the 1012 Podcast Network. And as part of the 1012 Podcast Network, we are brought to you by CharlieHustle.com, the clothing company, the vintage-inspired clothing company based out of Kansas City that specializes in collegiate and hometown apparel. Charlie Hustle loves the Big 12 Conference, wants every Big 12 fan to be the best dressed this season with their wide variety of official licensed collegiate apparel. That includes us at Arizona State, college football playoff contender, Arizona State. And if you use the promo code 101215 for 15% off all non-sale items, then you get a little discount. Of course, you can use the 15% off first-time customer discount. Then you can go back a second time, use the code 101215. That's the word 10, the number 12, the number 15 for 15% off all non-sale items. You can save money twice. With more than 30 schools to choose from, including all 16 Big 12 schools, they've got you covered with all of your collegiate apparel needs. Shop today at www.charliehustle.com. Use the promo code 101215 for 15% off all non-sale items. And yeah, Charlie Hustle. Vintage made fresh. And there we go. We plug the sponsor. And now it's time to talk about Arizona State football being 8-2, headed into a BYU home game. And what's at risk here? Arizona State with its first home undefeated season in 20 years. Arizona State with an opportunity to go into the Territorial Cup, win, get a spot in the Big 12 championship, win, get a spot in the college football playoff, win, become America's favorite college football program, win some more. That's what's at stake. All of the good things are on the other side of this weekend against BYU. So what we're going to talk about on this show, we're going to talk about how Arizona State got here, BYU, what to expect. We're going to skip basketball this week, although big props to Arizona State for beating Cal Poly. Very strange game. We'll get into that on next week's show as we prep for the upcoming games in the Pac-12 basketball season. But we're going to shift our focus to football for the purposes of this episode because, as many people have pointed out, this is the biggest game in a very long time for Arizona State football. This is the biggest game since Arizona State visited Corvallis in November with a number 6 ranking and the potential to go to the college football playoff. Only this time it's at home. And, you know, they're not the same. They're two completely different things. But who knew at the time that Arizona State was going into that game in Corvallis, that it would be, as far as the postseason goes, one of the last truly meaningful games. Not for bowl eligibility, not for the Territorial Cup. All of those things matter. But I'm talking about the type of thing that Arizona State experienced in the 1980s with their run to the Rose Bowl, that they experienced in the 1990s with their run to the Rose Bowl. In 2014, Arizona State had a shot. At the end of Rudy Carpenter's junior year, Arizona State had a shot. There's been one team every decade that has risen up and given us the opportunity to do something truly special. Now, the 1970s were a little bit different. Arizona State was running the show there for a minute. But since then, in my lifetime, at the very least, I moved to Arizona in 1987 from Wyoming. I was just a kid, 3-4 years old. Since then, it's been once every decade that an Arizona State team has risen up and had the opportunity to do something truly special. 87, 96, 07, 2014, 2024. Believe it or not, the team that was picked to win 4.5 games, obviously not picked to win 4.5 games, but the over-under was set at 4.5. The team that was picked to finish 16th in the Big 12 by the conference's own media has an opportunity to play in the college football playoff. And in order to do that, they're going to have to take on a team that is having a magical run of their own, Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars, who were 9-0 leading into last week's loss to Kansas. Kansas is a feisty team. We know this. We played them. They almost beat Kansas State. They did beat Iowa State. Kansas had back-to-back wins against ranked teams. They have an opportunity to do it again this week against Colorado. Though I hope that it's two former Pac-12 teams representing the Big 12 in the Big 12 championship. I would love another shot at Colorado. One of the most fun games, one of the only fun games of the 2023 season. Hosting Dion in Colorado in Sun Devil Stadium. Coming up short, but the crowd was electric. Having another shot at them would be fantastic. That's what I'm rooting for. But ultimately, one foot in front of the other, you just want to win this weekend and let everything else sort itself out. Now, I will bring up that on this week's Sun Devil Spaces, and if you're not aware, every Wednesday night on X, on Twitter, whatever you're calling it these days, every Wednesday night, we host a big gathering of Arizona State fans. We all get on there to talk Sun Devil football. And, you know, this Wednesday night, I posed a scenario that I called the maximum pain scenario. And I put it out there to everybody who was part of Sun Devil Spaces. And I said, I am personally rooting for the maximum pain scenario. And what is the maximum pain scenario? Arizona State beats BYU. University of Arizona beats TCU. University of Arizona goes into the Territorial Cup at home in Tucson with a bowl game on the line at 5-6. Arizona State goes into the Territorial Cup at 9-2 with a spot in the Big 12 championship on the line. Arizona State wins. Arizona loses everything while Arizona State gains everything. And it all happens at the exact same moment. It is the maximum pain scenario. It's a scenario where I can't just root for your downfall. I have to participate in it. And I know I said I'm not much of a rivalry guy, 364 days a year, 361 days a year outside of men's, women's basketball and football and baseball. You know, I don't really care what Arizona does. But I got a little bloodlust at this point. I remember last year's Territorial Cup. And not only do I want to win, I want it to be the most painful and humiliating situation possible to see Arizona State fans celebrate in Arizona Stadium in front of all their fans, in front of all their players, while all of their players and coaches realize that that's the end for them, that they blew it. There is no postseason. And with the portal, it's probably the last time a lot of them are ever going to see each other. And for the fans in that moment to realize that if they want to watch their own conference championship, they're going to have the Sophie's choice of rooting for either Arizona State or Colorado. And I want it to hurt. That is what I want. Now, what I was told when I presented this scenario is that's a non-negotiable. It's an absolutely not. Because in order for that scenario to come to fruition, but everyone, Kyle Dodd, Gus Farwell, everyone that took the opportunity to weigh in told me not one good thing can happen for University of Arizona. You're not allowed to want something good to happen for Arizona at all. So you can't be rooting for a scenario in which Arizona gets to 5 wins by beating TCU, who has Todd Graham there as a consultant. You got to be Team Hypnotoad. You got to be all about the Horned Frogs. You don't want Arizona to even have the opportunity to get into a bowl game. You want them being hopeless, destitute, yada, yada, yada. I understand that perspective, but here's what you're telling me is I can't root for University of Arizona to find $100 bill in the middle of the street bend over to pick it up as a bus is coming? You're telling me I can't root for that? They just have to get hit by the bus. They can't find the $100 bill, have a moment when they're like, ooh, this is my lucky day, boom. That's what you're telling me? I don't know. I think it's short-sighted. I personally am rooting for maximum pain scenario. If I have a friend that I secretly hate and they're climbing a tree and they're like, wow, I've never been this high up on this tree before. And I see the branch just above them has a little bit of a crack in it. And I say, I think you can get one higher. And they do make it to that branch before what happens next happens next. I'm in the wrong? Come on now. I personally am rooting for the maximum pain scenario. I would love for Arizona State to dash University of Arizona's dreams while fulfilling their own, all in one big fell swoop. So it's not going to break my heart if Arizona beats TCU. Especially if Arizona State beats BYU. It's going to set up for quite possibly, and that's just it. It's a gamble, right? It's a gamble. The absolute reverse could happen. And I understand anybody rooting for, the idea that the risk reward there is pretty heavy. I understand that. But if we lose to Arizona in Tucson, my level of upset is not going to change. Arizona State is still going bowling. We're still playing with house money. There are so many things to fall back on about this season that were so far outside of the expectation of what it was going to be. That pain's going to be short-lived. It's going to hurt regardless. If University of Arizona has to go to a bowl, they have to go to a bowl. But if everything happens the way that I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to sleep like a baby for the rest of 2024. It's going to feel so good to be in Dallas, playing in the Big 12 championship, and knowing that they're watching and have no plans. Oh, I forgot. It is basketball season. So anyway, let's get to this BYU game. Let's talk about BYU, who had a losing record last year. A lot of people talking about Kalani Sitake potentially on the hot seat. Now, he does have, if they get one more win this year, it'll be his third 10-win season in 5 years. So you might look at that in the aggregate and say, like, what kind of insane person believes that Kalani Sitake would be on the hot seat? Well, here's the deal. They had a couple of mediocre years. They moved into the Big 12, and the thought sometimes is going to be like, all right, well, what got us to the party is not going to be what keeps us at the party. It's time to level up. It's time to find a coach that maybe is more suited to helping us get over the hill. But they started out 9-0. They lose to Kansas. They were playing with fire a lot of the year. They should have lost to Oklahoma State. This is a good team, but they are playing, as, in my personal opinion, they're playing as close to their ceiling as they possibly can, and they've been there all year long. So let's get into what makes this BYU football team tick, who you might need to look out for as some of the better players, and what the keys to victory will be for Arizona State in this game. So first, let's talk about the BYU quarterback situation, because it's very interesting. Kind of mirrors Arizona State a little bit in that they both have third string quarterbacks that are Borghese. But they have somebody who was a backup last year as a starter, somebody who's been in college football forever as a second string, and a Borghese as a third string. So a little bit of mirror image situations right there. But Jake Retzlaff is a really, really interesting story, because this is somebody who played at one of the premier high school football programs in California in high school. His junior year, he was at Corona Centennial. ASU fans should know that name because they've gotten so many good players from Corona Centennial. So Jake Retzlaff, quarterback, Corona Centennial. Every single year, Corona Centennial sending their quarterback on to play big-time college football. Names you would certainly recognize, names like Tanner McKee. Like they have I believe the quarterback, Husan Longstreet, who just committed to USC, might be from Corona Centennial as well. So, I mean, this is a school where you know that if you're the starting quarterback, you're going to get an opportunity to play big time college football. Well, he was there his junior year, splitting time with a lot of other quarterbacks, and he ended up leading them in passing yards as a junior. Going into his senior year, the thought was, all right, we got to give these keys to Jake Retzlaff, because the two quarterbacks he was splitting time with were both seniors. Jake Retzlaff was tied for the lead in touchdown passes on this team. He's the only player on the team to throw for more than 1,000 yards. And, he had played some good football. So the problem was, this was 2019. And this is a school in California. There was no high school season for Jake Retzlaff his senior year. So what did he do? He went the junior college route. He started off his journey at Golden West College, and then transferred to Riverside City College for his sophomore year. Both years, very, very good years at the JUCO level. As a JUCO freshman, he leads his team to an 11-1 record, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Even scores 9 rushing touchdowns. And it's very, very clear that this is going to be, one of the better JUCO quarterbacks in the country, because he did spend a second year in JUCO. And he did something that isn't actually very common at the JUCO level. He transferred from one JUCO to another. Transfers to Riverside. And he goes from throwing for 3,300 yards as a freshman to 4,600 yards as a sophomore. He becomes the number one JUCO prospect in the country at the quarterback position. He even rushed for 500 yards. BYU lands his commitment, and a name that Arizona State fans might be familiar with, Keaton Slovis, is there as a Pittsburgh transfer, beats him out for the starting job. So Keaton Slovis, who at one point got revenge on Arizona State for not giving, for Herm Edwards refusing to greenlight his recruiting by, I think, throwing 4 touchdowns in the first quarter in a game back in 2019, where Jaden Daniels missed the game and Joey Yellen had to play quarterback for Arizona State. Arizona State almost came back in that game. So Keaton Slovis is there. He's played at USC. He's played at Pittsburgh, and he's at BYU trying to finish his career. He gets injured. Retzlaff comes in, and he doesn't look all that great. He goes 0-4, only throws 3 touchdowns in 4 games, only completes 50% of his passes. So BYU's thinking to themselves, maybe Jake Retzlaff not the answer, right? So they bring in Jerry Bohannon. And Jerry Bohannon was at Baylor for 4 whole years, went to USF for 2 years, where Blake Barnett transferred to ASU from. Didn't even play in 2023. And he transfers to BYU for his final year, his 7th year in college football. And so they have somebody who's been in college football going on 7 years. They have Jake Retzlaff, and then they go and they get Trayson Bourget. And they have a competition between the 3 of them. And what surprised, I think, a lot of BYU fans was Jake Retzlaff stands out. He ends up getting the starting job. And in their heads, Big 12 media picked him to finish 13th, right? So not a lot of respect. They had a bad year the year before, and they're rolling with a quarterback they don't really trust. And so, and on the national level, Jake Retzlaff is a story because he's a Jewish quarterback at BYU, so that's a little bit different. BYU in recent years definitely been open to having players that, if they'll go by the honor code, don't necessarily have to be of the Mormon faith. And so, the fact that he came into this year, won his first 9 games, had 18 touchdowns and 7 interceptions going into last week's game against Kansas, that got him a lot of hype. Not Heisman hype, but for being undefeated, for being part of that first college football playoff bracket release, being included in that. A lot of people have kind of gotten to know his story. He's a solid quarterback. Now, he completes less than 60% of his passes. The only time at the collegiate level he's ever been above 60% is that second year at Riverside College. And even then, that was only 63. So he's not somebody who turns the ball over a ton, but he's not somebody who, it has a bunch of efficiency-based numbers, like a Dylan Gabriel or a Bo Nix at Oregon, who are completing above 70% of their passes every single year. He's gonna give the defense an opportunity to make a play. Usually he's going to turn the ball over about once a game. He had the game-winning drive when he didn't play well the whole game against Oklahoma State. But he rushed for 81 yards in that game and really showed dual threat capability. And, he's a starting quarterback of a team that might be in the college football playoff. People are kind of starting to get to know him. He's not going to be the best quarterback that Arizona State has faced this year. As a pro prospect, I put Brendan Sorsby of Cincinnati ahead of him. I put him more on the level of Baron Morton at Texas Tech, but less of a gunslinger, a little bit more cautious and careful and judicious. Some of that might just be the offense that BYU is running. He's dangerous, but to me, high floor, low ceiling guy, right? So, this is somebody that Arizona State's definitely going to have to get after, pressure, have him move around outside of the pocket, but he will pick up first downs. He's a good, solid quarterback. Another player that I think you really need to know on this BYU team is running back LJ Martin. And you might check his stats if you're just looking at the box scores and say to yourself, well, he only has 500 yards rushing. Why should we be worried about him? Well, first of all, he hasn't really played until mid-October. So it's 500 yards in about half a season. This is a very, very good football player. He has 4 straight games averaging over 5 yards a carry. 3 of those 4 games over 6 yards a carry. They don't give him the ball a lot. This isn't a Taj Boyd Texas Tech situation. This isn't an Ollie Gordon Oklahoma State situation. He is not going to get more than 20 touches, or at least he hasn't up to this point. But he's pretty dangerous with what he does get. They're a balanced offense. They're a methodical offense. They've got some decent receivers on this team, some impressive receivers on this team, but none that I would say fully outclass what Arizona State has going on in the defensive backfield. Some guys that you do have to look out for. Their leading receiver as far as receptions is Chase Roberts. He's averaging about 15 yards a catch. He's somebody who gets about 5-6 yards a game, or catches a game. Hasn't gotten into the end zone much. You have Darius Lassiter, who he can be a big play threat. He's a little bit better after the catch than most players on this BYU roster. Keelan Marion will make a play every once in a while. But a lot of their receivers, they're good. They're good for, their possession receivers. They're good for getting first downs in big situations. They don't run much through their tight ends. I think 15 catches on the season for Reiner Swanson and Mata'ava Ta'ase. But if they get down in the red zone, they are a threat. Ta'ase has 3 touchdowns this year. You kind of have to worry about everybody when it comes to BYU because it's non-discriminatory. If they're open, that's who Retzlaff is going to get the ball to. They don't necessarily have a go-to playmaking person on this defense. Nobody who's averaging more than 66 yards a game receiving. On, as far as their running backs go, a lot of that is driven by a very talented offensive line. They want to bully you. They want to do everything they can to get 5 yards on first down, 6 yards on second down. Like, never even get to third down, right? Like, that is the goal of BYU, is to stay out of third down situations. They do turn the ball over. They don't fumble often, but they'll throw a pick here and there. So Arizona State's going to have to really capitalize on any opportunities they're given in that space. And then on the defensive side of the ball, that's really where I feel like BYU has been good. Not great, but good. This is a team that's kind of played with fire all year long because the offense hasn't really outpaced what their defense is giving them at any given time. BYU is only giving up 19 points a game. That's 24th. Okay, so they are a good defense. But it's not like they've played a ton of really great teams. At the beginning of the year, this BYU schedule looked like it was going to be very good. And it looked like it was going to be advantageous for them because they had several teams that received first place votes on their schedule. In fact, they had all 5 teams that received first place votes in the Big 12 on their schedule, and most of them they got at home. Kansas State was at a home game, Arizona was a home game, Oklahoma State was a home game, and Kansas was a home game. So 4 of the 5 teams that got first place votes. It turns out all 5 of those teams are not that good, Kansas State being the best of them, and BYU did roll Kansas State. They did. But they needed a miracle to beat Utah. They needed a miracle to beat Oklahoma State. They barely hung on in a road game at Baylor. Barely hung on. And they ended up only beating UCF. I would say that's a good win. That was a good win on the road, but they lost to Kansas. So they go 4-1 in those games, but every single one of those teams is below the standard of what they brought into the season. And for the most part this year, they've been, like I said, opportunistic. They get some takeaways. They had 3 interceptions against Arizona. They had a 6-game streak of multiple interceptions on defense. They got 2 against Kansas State, 2 against Baylor. Like I said, they got 3 against Arizona, and then 2 against Oklahoma State, 2 at Central Florida, and 2 at Utah. Now, of course, Utah without Cam Rising. BYU got the benefit of that late holding call to pull off that miracle. And then against Kansas is the first time this year, in 7 games where they only got 1. But they've had a pick on defense every single week this year. Their scheming in the defensive backfield has been phenomenal. They have 17 interceptions as a team in 10 games. But as far as giving up yards, Baylor threw for 324 on them. Arizona threw for 275. Now, Arizona was trying to throw themselves back into the game. But you say, all right, well, how's their run defense? Touch and go. Touch and go. They gave up over 5 yards a carry to Kansas State, 228 yards on the ground. They gave up 270 yards on the ground to Oklahoma State. 180 to Central Florida. Utah, with a banged up Mekhi Bernard, averaged 5 yards a carry on them. They handled Kansas last week, and they have to be really frustrated that they gave up less than 250 yards of offense and lost the game, but Kansas's defense held them down. So they can be thrown on, they can be run on. Now, there has not been a team this year that has managed to do both. There has not been a team this year that has managed to throw on them with consistency and run on them with consistency. Oklahoma State had 5 offensive touchdowns against them, but still, they only completed 18 passes for 150 yards. So no one has been able to fully exploit this BYU defense. And BYU's on a streak of 3 straight games allowing less than 10 passing first downs. Arizona State, not really a team that's going to go out and have double-digit passing first downs. But here's the scary thing, right? What Arizona State is going to do is they are going to run for a lot of those. BYU has only given up 18 first downs on the ground in their last 3 games. Where they set themselves apart is they are very, very physical up front, and they're very opportunistic defensively. ASU isn't going to have to play mistake-free football when you consider that BYU has forced mistakes in every single game. They're just going to have to be steadfast. If you turn the ball over, go and get it back yourself. Yes, BYU has 17 interceptions on defense, but they've thrown 9. Yes, BYU has recovered 4 fumbles, but they've lost 4. So it's not impossible for Arizona State to exploit this defense, but to depend on the idea that you're going to throw on them and pass on them when nobody has done that yet this year. And you can't depend on the fact that you're at home. You really can't. BYU has been a very good road team this year. They won at SMU. That's probably their biggest win. 1 loss SMU on the road. Now, SMU hadn't benched Preston Stone for Kevin Jennings yet. They haven't figured out their running game. I think if those 2 teams played again, I think SMU wins that game. But BYU did win. They deserve respect. But I will say, they're not this invincible team. And I know Arizona State's favored. I know they're favored. But this is a game where you do have to be really, really careful. Because being at home is not going to help you. This is a really, really good road team. And you could probably expect that 8,000 to 9,000 of the 15 or of the 50,000 that show up for this sold out game are going to be wearing blue and white. Somebody at one point told me this and I didn't fact check it. I just kind of believed it. But there are more BYU alumni in Arizona than there are in Utah. And I'm talking people who are not university affiliated like university employees, but just people out in the workforce. I was told that and I said, you know what? That sounds true. I'm not going to fact check it. I'm just going to believe it. Then I'm going to go on a podcast and regurgitate it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But anybody who has been in Arizona for any length of time knows that there is a loyalty to BYU that most people in the country see to Notre Dame. As far as there's a lot of people of a certain faith who root for a school that maybe they didn't even go to. But what Arizona has a lot of is BYU graduates. I worked around, lived around, was taught by, was friends with very many of them. So there's going to be a ton of support for BYU in that stadium. We saw it when BYU played Arizona at Cardinal Stadium just a few years ago. So, what do I think Arizona State is going to be able to do well in this game? Well, let's look at some of the similarly built teams that Arizona State has played against. Arizona State against Utah, 37 carries, 176 yards. Arizona State against Kansas State with a not super healthy Cam Scadaboo, 38 carries, 123 yards. I think you can expect around 40 carries. I mean, really, that's what Arizona State has done all year long. There is only one game this year where Arizona State passed more than they threw, and it's because they had to when they were down at Texas Tech. But at this point, I mean, we're talking 266 pass attempts to 419 rushing attempts. Arizona State's a running team. Make no mistake about it. 19 rushing touchdowns to 17 passing touchdowns. Arizona State wants to run the ball. And you can run the ball on this BYU team. You just got to be careful to not put yourself in a 3rd and long, which is what their defensive backs absolutely relish. And I'm a fan of a few of these defensive players for BYU. Micah Harper, one of my all-time favorite cornerbacks to cover at the Arizona high school level, where I work for Arizona Varsity, a Rivals affiliate, covering these high school players. He was dominant, and he has continued to be so at BYU. They have some very, very good players in that secondary, and you just don't want to be in a situation where you're having to take too many risks, where you're feeling yourself a little bit. And Kenny Dillingham said this week he thinks that Arizona State is going to get BYU's best shot. And I believe that to be true too. And it feels nice that Arizona State is a 3-point favorite, but Arizona State has gone into a lot of the games that they've won this year as an underdog. So if anybody knows that it's not necessarily the point spread that you should be paying attention to, that's going to be your run-of-the-mill ASU fan. But my hope is it is a very active and loud stadium environment that at the very least, you're going to hear a lot of cheers for BYU, but that the overwhelming amount of support comes when Arizona State makes a big play on defense. Hits a deep pass. The first time Cam Scattaboo runs a player over. That's really when you're going to hear this crowd come alive, and Arizona State is able to feed off it. Here's a couple of worries I have regarding Arizona State. Believe it or not, Arizona State has not had a rushing touchdown in its last 2 games. The 19 rushing touchdowns that Arizona State had this year all came in the first 8 games of the season. You want to see that rectified. You want to see, and Sam Leavitt, he can run it as well. And I think he's going to have opportunity possibly to run one in himself. Arizona State, I think this year still only has 1 game where, no, it's 2 because Jordan Tyson had 12 catches for 176 yards. He did it by himself. So Arizona State only has 2 of their 10 games this year where the receivers have combined to have more than 10 catches, 10 or more catches. Even last week with Jordan Tyson getting 12 catches for 176 yards, all the receivers combined only had 14 receptions. And I'm not counting tight ends or running backs in that, just receivers. So only twice this year. So it would be nice to have somebody else step up and make a play as a receiver. I know Xavier Guillory is beating himself up over, dropping that deep ball last week. If Jake Smith is healthy, you really want to see him get his first touchdown of the season. Melquan Stovall, getting him going would be huge. So to have somebody else as a receiver show up is going to be very, very important. Getting into the end zone with your running backs, having literally anybody but Jordan Tyson do some damage from the receiver position, those are going to be very, very big. Now, defensively, this is an Arizona State team that has not gotten home much lately in the pass rush. So sacking Jake Retzlaff, probably key number 3 for me. Because they didn't have a sack last week at Kansas State. Clayton Smith is still leading the team with 4 sacks on the season. 4 is not going to get it done. You don't want your leading sacker to only have 4 sacks. And Clayton Smith has not had a sack since the Kansas game. Clayton Smith is on a 5-game sackless drought. The next leader in sacks on the season for Arizona State is Jacob Kangaika. So you got to get home with your pass rush. Arizona State is playing very, very good defense this year. Very good defense. They're only giving up 23 points a game. That's still top half as far as the entire NCAA. But they have played a little bit tougher of a schedule, in my opinion, as far as some teams with offensive firepower than BYU has. But I still think for a pass rush that doesn't always get home, and for a defense that gets some turnovers, but they're not in the stratosphere of having 17 picks like BYU, they've played relatively well. They played a lot of bend but don't break. They've tipped away a lot of passes. Welch and Abney have combined for 13 pass deflections. You throw Rouser and Alford in there, that's another 9. 22 between the 4 of them. Shamari Simmons has laid some absolutely big hits. And as a defensive back, has 6 tackles for a loss. That's not something that you see very often. So there are things that Arizona State is doing well that aren't necessarily like the traditional things. Now, where they do kind of stack up to BYU is, while they're not generating as many turnovers, they do have a lot of players, and BYU has a lot of players that have had generated multiple turnovers on the season. BYU has 8 players that have generated at least 2 turnovers on the season. Arizona State has 6. So that goes to show you that the help on either side can come from anywhere. There's a lot of players that are going to have the opportunity to be a star in this game. And for God's sakes, little BYU PTSD to the Arizona State defense, if you see a fumble, please fall on it. Don't be a hero. Merlin Robertson fumbling after recovering a fumble because of Tyler Algier still haunts me to this day. So if you see a fumble, please just fall on that ball. Don't be a hero. Unless you were successful as a hero, then I'm going to say that, you did the right thing. But yeah, just give this opportunity and give this offense an opportunity to cook. Don't try to be a hero. Don't be a Merlin Robertson. Well, be a half Merlin Robertson. Recover the fumble, but don't give it back. Because that was a game that Arizona State could have won, but that certainly turned the tide. Now, offensively for Arizona State, Sam Leavitt really came alive. I would say his previous game against Kansas State was the first time that I got it. Now, I'm not a Sam Leavitt hater. I'm not. I have my preference for a quarterback. I thought ASU had the potential to get bowl eligible this year, and their best bet was to go with somebody who has 5 career 300-yard passing games. And I stand by that. I think that Arizona State would be in a similar position to what it is now had they rocked with Trenton Bourguet. I believe that to be true. But Sam Leavitt's escapability has carried Arizona State at times this year. That is undeniable. And against Kansas State, he had some of the best throws I've seen all year. His second touchdown pass to Jordan Tyson, the drop ball from Xavier Guillory, he's getting it. It's happening. I am seeing what Marcus Arroyo and Kenny Dillingham were talking about. I'm seeing the vision for the first time in the 10th game. I wouldn't say that I was overly critical of Sam Leavitt. I would say that it was very, very clear that he had accuracy issues early in the season, still has a few. But what is becoming increasingly clear is that he's a gamer, and he will do what it takes to win. And for the first time, I think that could include making the game-winning throw. Not just getting loose to make the game-winning throw, but actually connecting the dots. And that's a really great and encouraging place to be if you're Arizona State. Because what Kenny Dillingham wanted most, outside of an escapable quarterback, one that could create opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise, is someone who is going to start for multiple seasons. Because the culture that you're building needs to have a foundation, needs to have a cornerstone. And the desire to want somebody who is going to be around for multiple seasons as your cornerstone, I think ultimately had the biggest influence on the decision that they made at quarterback this season. And when you're 8-2 with a quarterback who has 17 touchdown passes, 4 interceptions, you have a shot at the college football playoff, and you're coming off of a ranked road win in November where your quarterback threw 3 touchdown passes and was clearly the best player for that offense. That's a thing that you need to be really excited about. Now, do more receivers need to get involved? Absolutely. Like, that is a non-negotiable. You can't be a Reggie Ball Georgia Tech team where every single pass you complete is to Megatron. You can't. people will find a way to take Jordan Tyson away. Just like offenses or defenses have adjusted to focus in on Cam Scatterbo. You have to consistently be evolving. And what if Jordan Tyson, he's been banged up. So, you do need more than just Jordan Tyson. You need that. But we are talking about somebody who's in his first year as a full-time starter, a redshirt freshman. And the progression to this point is much like Arizona State football season, beyond what most of us imagined. So you have to be incredibly satisfied. Cam Scatterbo. He's the rock of this team. He has carried this team up to this point. He deserves the last 2 weeks to have had to not have to do absolutely everything for this team. But at this point, we do need him back. So hopefully he is healthy. Saw him running sideline to sideline more than I ever have against Kansas State. That was very interesting to me. Did seem to be wincing after he took a few hits. Hopefully getting that, extra week. Hopefully he didn't get banged up too bad, and getting that extra week will give him the opportunity to be truly special in this game against BYU. And then defensively, you're just looking for people to make plays. And I know every single week I harp on this, that Miles Rouser is a net good and we should all love what he brings to the table. I know he drew a personal foul last week. That was the worst call of all time. It was a sympathy flag. He hit a guy in bounds who was clearly limping and was headed out of bounds. However, he was in bounds and he had the ball. What are you supposed to do? Go against your instincts? Do you think Miles Rouser believed that he was going to get a penalty for hitting someone who was limping, when that's not actually a penalty that exists? Do you think that ever went through his mind? Do you need intimidators on your defense? So for anybody who's frustrated with Miles Rouser has never done anything wrong in his entire life. Ever. And I will defend him until the next mistake that he makes, and I'm overwhelmed with people in my mentions on on Twitter who have all designated me as being overprotective of him and his reputation. But I think he's so necessary to what this defense does, and he's not the only hard hitter. He's not the only playmaker. So many people on this defense have delivered. Caleb McCullough, the way that he's coming around, true Sun Devil for life material. LT Welch and Keith Abney, I think, have done a tremendous job in coverage. Xavier Alford and that interception that he made against Kansas State early in the game last week, I think really set the tone for what that game was going to be. And then Shamari Simmons has sent some people into the netherworld with some of the hits that he's delivered this year. We just need a pass rush to go along with it. The defensive backs have been doing a great job, but there is no better help to them than a pass rush that gets home. And my hope is, we haven't seen a ton of linebacker blitzing this year, but it might be time. It might be time because this is a defense that was supposed to be very, very aggressive, not really know where the pass rush was coming from at any given time. Our linebackers, I believe, have combined for 2 sacks total. It is time that Keyshawn Elliott or Kavion Thunderbird or Caleb McCullough or Jordan Crook, it's time that one of them gets home. Martell Hughes, I don't care who it is. But it's time that one of our linebackers, Tate Romney, against his former team. Think of it. Imagine it. Manifest it. Former BYU Cougar Tate Romney sacking Jake Ratliff, forcing a fumble that we fall on and do not fumble back to them. Imagine it happening. It could happen. So let's get into our Todd of the week, followed by our Sun Devil signs, and let's sign off for this week But first, let's pay some bills on the Fortcast on the 1012 Podcast Network. All right, so let's get to this week's Todd of the Week. And if you're not familiar, Todd of the Week is an award that we give out each week to somebody who goes above and beyond to help the Sun Devil community in some way. They go above and beyond for Sun Devil athletics. And the reference is Todd Graham. When Todd Graham came to Arizona State, he had to sell the new stadium. And, he went out, he gave like 200 different speeches to raise all this money while coaching the team. So not only is it, somebody who goes above and beyond, but maybe somebody who even goes above and beyond to their own detriment, right? So Todd of the Week is something that we've done every single week. And this week, it's a big award and it goes to a lot of people. Parker Jones, Jones Ford, Verde Valley, and the Sun Devil source community on the 247 Sports Network, Chris Cartman's website, and the forums over there haven't always been the kindest to me, but they are Sun Devils. They are a great group of people. And this week, Jones Ford and the Sun Devil source community got together to buy Jordan Crook a new car, something that is now allowable through NIL rules. They crowdsourced a new car for him when his Nissan Altima blew up, raised $15,000 to get him a new Ford Expedition to show that this Sun Devil community cares about a player in need. These players, they sacrifice their body, they sacrifice their time. And whereas the old way of thinking, which is still a pretty prevalent way of thinking, is that they get the reward of an education and room and board, the younger generations are really understanding that there's been an unlimited pie of revenue that hasn't been shared with the players, who are the bulk of the labor that this unlimited pie of revenue is built upon. And they want the players to be able to share in that. They aren't able to share in that yet, but the concession that was made in this short window of time is that they're able to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness. And businesses can partner with them to do things that are mutually beneficial. This is a very mutually beneficial arrangement for Jones Ford. They got a lot of positive media about it. They got a story on Fox 10 Arizona. Everybody's talking about this online. The ROI for Jones Ford, is great, but this was also crowd-funded. $15,000 raised through Sun Devil fans and their disposable, expendable income in the holiday season to make sure that a linebacker on the team had the ability to get to and from practice. When I covered the team professionally, when it was my job to cover this team, players would talk to me and say their biggest need was transportation, reliable transportation. And car dealerships have done an awesome job coming alongside college football programs to provide some of those on a lease basis. But this is a car, this Ford Expedition, that Jordan Crook is going to own outright, and it's going to be because Sun Devil fans partnered with a car dealership to make this happen, to show Jordan Crook his value to the community, to this team, to meet a need, to dip into their own pockets to do so. And I have goosebumps talking about this. I'm so proud to be a Sun Devil. Whatever faction of Sun Devil you are, wherever you get your media from, whoever you listen to, whoever you prefer, it doesn't matter, to come together in a situation like this and to help meet a need, to create the warm and fuzzies that come along with this story, and to do some tangible good and send really a shot out, to send a flare up to recruits and to other people that Sun Devils are going to take care of their own. Just awesome. So shout out to Sun Devil Source, to Chris Cartman for signal boosting that, to Jones Ford, Parker Jones, and everybody involved in that. You are this week's Todd of the Week. You deserve it more than anyone has ever deserved it before. And drive safe out there, Jordan Crook. We definitely appreciate you. So let's get into our Sun Devil signs segment. 5 signs that you can bring to the stadium that might irk the thousands of BYU fans who will be in attendance. That isn't necessarily the low-hanging fruit of attacking somebody's religion. You don't want to do stuff like that, right? That's completely unnecessary. There's plenty that has to do with the play on the field, where you can tease these BYU fans a little bit. And so let's get into it. let's get into it. Our Sun Devil signs, number 5 sign of the week, the obvious one. Scottsdale has better Cougars. We know this to be true. Whether you are a Cougar supporter or not, I am not a Cougar supporter. Based on the Urban Dictionary definition of what a Cougar is, I am not a Cougar supporter. Perhaps in my own home, but again, not based on the definition that we all understand a Cougar to be. Scottsdale has better Cougars. Number 4, Sun Devil sign. Utah is the real BYU. University of Utah is the real BYU. I don't know if you know this, but BYU, they're a clone. They're a pretender. University of Utah was actually founded by Brigham Young. He's the one who organized the regents in 1847. He is the one that set up the University of Utah. It is his handiwork. It is his craftsmanship. Yeah, they named a university after him decades later, but the real BYU is the one that was started by Mr. BY. So try that. Try bringing that sign into the stadium, because that's a pretty intense rivalry. But University of Utah is the real BYU. Sun Devil sign number 3. Provo is the Tucson of Utah. Now, I know that there are a lot of Sun Devils that live in Tucson. It is what it is. But comparatively, like honestly, Provo versus Salt Lake City, let's be honest. Provo is their Tucson. I have been to Provo many times. I've been to Salt Lake City many times. I had AmeriCorps training as a 19-year-old. I had to spend a week in Provo. I've never in a situation been, I was 19, nothing to do every night, out walking the streets. I've never felt simultaneously unsafe and bored the way that I did in Provo, Utah. Outside of the university, So that's Sun Devil sign number 3. Provo is the Tucson of Utah. Sun Devil sign number 2. Danny Ainge didn't win here either. Now that stings. It's a little bit of a cell phone. I love Danny Ainge. And I hate Danny Ainge. I don't think it's possible to only love Danny Ainge unless you have Ainge as a last name. You have either been on the other side of the way he plays basketball, or you've benefited from it. He's the white Pat Bev, but with skill. Danny Ainge could have probably been in the NFL. He was in Major League Baseball, and obviously he went to 6 championships in the NBA, winning 2 of them. Didn't win in Arizona. Didn't win for the Suns. Player or coach. Couldn't get it done. Same as BYU. Probably, you might want to say Jimmer or that, huge bust Rafael Araujo, but probably going to point to Danny Ainge as the best basketball player to ever play for BYU, but he didn't win there. They got deep in the tournament once. They did get deep in the tournament once. In 1981, shout out to Bobby Knight and the Hoosiers. But BYU, they never got that. I don't think they ever even made a Final Four, if I'm not mistaken, with Danny Ainge. So just maybe comfort them a little bit. Maybe list that, they lost to University of San Francisco, University of Clemson, and University of Virginia in the NCAA tournament in back-to-back years with Danny Ainge. But he didn't win there. He didn't win here. So Danny Ainge didn't win here either. And the number 1 Sun Devil sign, we get 10% of your points. And I know that's not making fun of the religion. It's a little doctrine, a little dogma. We get 10% of your points. Because why not? We're going to need it. We're going to need it. It's going to be a tough game. But I am very, very excited. Arizona State, one of the most meaningful games in the last decade. We're coming up on an hour of podcasting. You should probably shut it down. But before we close out, I want to thank the 1012 Network. I want to thank everybody who shows up for Sun Devil Spaces. And I want to point out something very funny that happened this week. We'll close on this. I have a Google alert set up for Herm Edwards. Anytime Herm Edwards is in the news, I get an email. So I probably get like 10 emails a week because he does a lot of radio shows and sometimes that's aggregated. He doesn't say a whole lot of interesting stuff. You'll notice there's not like a, can you believe Herm Edwards said this? Because almost everything that he serves up is a platitude. It's based on, his value system. He doesn't really, he's like a punk band, plays in 3 chords, But this week I got a lot of alerts because it was the anniversary of the Miracle of the Meadowlands. And also because he was named the keynote speaker of the opening of something called the International Service Association. And as the keynote speaker of the International Service Association, which is just a giant B2B conference that happens in Nashville with golfing and riverboat trips. And as that speaker, the International Shipping or Service Association pointed out that he's going to be talking about how to lead a business through attention to detail. And the ISA, they put out this tweet, and they've been on Twitter for like 15 years. They put out a tweet every single day. No one has ever responded to a single tweet they've ever put out. Whoever's managing their social media is carefully crafting each and every social media post with photos, with links, with all the right hashtags, hoping they get some sort of response. And they put it out there into the world. And they got 1,600 followers on Twitter. Maybe some people see it, but nobody really interacts with it. Because what does the ISA even do? How is it relevant to me? It's not necessarily content that's going to draw a lot of engagement. So every day a tweet. Every day a tweet. No interactions. Going back years. Every day a tweet. And this week when they announced that Herm Edwards was going to be their keynote speaker, I got a Google alert. I pulled up the tweet and I decided to quote tweet it. And all I said was basically like, oh, attention to detail, huh? Doing the little things. That's it. And this tweet from the ISA was swarmed to by Arizona State fans. And there are currently over 100 replies that are, they're aggressive. They are aggressive. And so I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to pull it up right now. November 19th, announcing the ISA opening keynote, Herm Edwards, ESPN NFL analyst, join in as he explores how focusing on the little things can lead to executing big visions, both on and off the field. Get the details at isa25.isapartners.org/agenda. Hashtag where business gets done. This tweet has, in comparison to what they usually get, about 100 impressions, 31,000 impressions, 111 replies. It's been quoted 21 times. And the responses are pretty wild. Such as, does he consider NCAA regulations little things? Will he be touching on how to run a college football program into the ground? Tell that fraud coward to return the money he owes to ASU. Be careful, he will steal your money. Clearly, your organization does little to no research when picking speakers. But my favorite of all the replies, I wanted to share this. This is where I wanted to go out. This is the type of thing that I find funny. And if they didn't raise money for a car, and I didn't have to give the Todd of the week to all of Sun Devil Source / Jones Auto, my Todd of the week would go to Jordan Ellis, who was in the replies of this tweet, at Jordan_A_Ellis, who is criminally underrated reply, ISA equals incompetent speaker alert. And I have to say that made me laugh so hard. And also just the idea that this social media manager logged on November 20th to post their little tweet of the day. And they saw hundreds of literal pitchforks, of angry pitchforks, avatars. It just just unbelievably hilarious. And yeah, am I petty for rooting for, Herm Edwards' spot to get blown up? Look, this man is going to continue to be relevant. He's going to continue to make a lot of money as a motivational speaker on ESPN every day. The fact of the matter is he never faced any meaningful accountability of any kind. And so if there's some mean tweets under the announcement that he's going to make $25,000, $30,000 to tell people about how to focus on the little things, something that he did not do while he was in Tempe, then I'm going to derive a little bit of joy from that. So shout out to all the Sun Devils in the ISA Association's mentions. Shout out to everybody who raised some money for Jordan Crook. And shout out to your Arizona State Sun Devils football team who has the opportunity to put themselves in position to play for the Big 12 championship as long as they win that Territorial Cup. And yes, I am rooting for the maximum pain scenario.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.